Thanks, Stefan, and thanks, everyone. It's really great to be here, and I'm fighting my jet lag, but I'm going to win. As Stefan said, I curated, along with a couple of colleagues, a show in Paris this year, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. It's kind of funny. I was looking at the Games for Change videos from New York, the event that happened just this summer in New York, and Margaret Robertson was giving a talk. She's a designer and a game organizer with Hide and Seek, a group based in London. And when she gave her talk, it was called Legs versus Fingers, and it was about games that you play in cultural spaces and what their strengths are and what the challenges are of those. And in the midst of the talk, which must have taken place in June, she said that the next day that there would be a show opening in Paris at which Hide and Seek was going to have a piece. And in fact, that was this show, so I'm very happy to be able to show you the outcome of the projects, not only the ones that Hide and Seek did, but a few other of those, and to be able to give you a bit of some lessons learned, and also to just give you some maybe inspiration that you could take for your own communities. So as Stefan mentioned, the show, Joue Le Jeu, which means play along, kind of like participate and engage in this and suspend your disbelief, kind of, was in this place called the Gaite lyrique in Paris, a very large, new, shiny cultural center. And they invited me, along with two of my colleagues from Canada, Lynn Hughes and Cindy Parimba. And I should say, you can probably tell I'm not really Austrian. I'm an adopted Austrian. I've just become a resident about a month ago, and so I'm from Florida, Texas, places like that. So, in case you were confused by my perfect American accent, that's why. So we were invited to curate this show at the Gaite lyrique, and part of our reasoning, it was interesting when Stefan asked me to come talk, because I have definitely worked on social issue games for change, but I wouldn't say that that's currently the practice that I'm in. But I thought about it, and I realized that actually, yes, that this show was kind of an effort, a curatorial effort, to change people's ideas about what a game is and could be through the medium of games themselves. So it's kind of like a meta game for change, but in the size of a full exhibition. And the show consisted of a bunch of new pieces that were commissioned specifically for the physical space in the building, the different areas and the different technologies it had, and also 3 different game arcades that brought in pre-existing games and put them in thematic subgroups. So I'll talk mostly about the commission games, but then there's a little bit about the others too. So, and why is this relevant to you guys? Well, I think even more than other types of games for change are invading these cultural and social spaces, such as museums and science centers and places like that. The game here on the screen is actually the only one that I'm going to show you that's not part of Joue Le Jeu. This is a game called Star Wars Identities, which was an exhibit that I worked on just prior to Joue Le Jeu with a group in Montreal. That is taking it started at the Montreal Science Center, and it's an exhibition about human identity. So what makes up our personality, or our family of origin, or our culture, or like profession, our mentors, all the things about us that come together and form our identity. But it's viewed through the lens of Star Wars, and part of the exhibit is you go on a quest through these different aspects, like family and planet of origin, but you do it as creating a Star Wars character. So you learn about all these aspects through the filter of Star Wars. So it combines that passion that people have for the Star Wars with learning about psychology, anthropology, things like that. And so these kinds of things are out there. They're happening already. And I think from Joue Le Jeu, we can probably take some ideas of the way things went for us, and I'll share with you some sort of insights that we had. I was lucky enough to be able to spend the entire summer in Paris, so I really saw the exhibit from, well, before it opened and then during its lifetime. So I feel like I have a lot of learning to share. Oh, and Stefan, if you could give me like a 5-minute warning towards the end, because if I start to ramble, I'll probably skip ahead to the part that I really want to end with. So you're making a game for a cultural space. Where do you begin? Well, I would suggest you begin with the space itself. The space is like your platform that you're developing for, and each one, of course, is going to be unique, but you have to think very carefully about the space and how it's used. It's kind of like a sculptor would think of the physical configuration of their material. So, and it's not only about the architecture or the technology, it's also about the social purpose and uses of the space. For instance, if you're making a game for like a hospital waiting room, it's going to be quite different than a game that you'd make for someone to take home and play in their living room. And if you are making a game for a public square in a park, that would be quite different from an interior of a science museum or something like that. By way of example, here's the Gaite in Cutaway. It's quite a large facility. It's a public facility that's partially owned by the city of Paris, and it's open to the whole community. There's parts of it that are free access during its opening hours, which interestingly are from 2 till 8 p.m., so covering the time when kids get out of school, I think, is the most important thing. And it has things like a media library and a few cafes and social space where you can just hang out. And it also has spaces where you would have something like a lecture or a workshop, performances. That very large hall you see is quite a large performance hall. Some really good concerts happen there. And of course, the very bottom level is a quite large exhibition space. So some of these areas are free all the time. Others are a paid entry. And the Joue Le Jeu show actually took both of those. It covered a lot of the area that's open to the public and also the exhibition space. So when you're thinking about like the space and how are you going to use it, I'm going to just go through a few different questions that might be interesting to ask yourself or ask the people that work there, and really research and find out how the space is actually a game where you have to, well, it's a multiplayer, 2-player game. Everyone has an opponent they're playing against, but in order to play a piece into your game, you have to go to one of the other games, not your own, and steal a piece out of their game that they're using and put it in your own. So it becomes kind of like this chaotic swirl of a game. And so it's actually this piece is right in front of well, when the exhibit was up, it was right in front of the cafe. So it's in a very public area, the space right between the cafe and the concert hall. And so questions you want to ask are, is the area always accessible, or is it sometimes restricted? Is it monitored? Are there people that'll be able to watch the game, or even mediated? Does it require someone to help players? And in the case of interference, there was a pretty easy rule set, but to learn to play it, it was actually much more useful if one of the mediators who worked at the Gaite was there to sort of help you get started on your game, so that everyone could like start learning on their own pace. There was a lot of other material to learn the game, like an actual sort of rule card, but having someone there was part of the way the game was designed. And then is the flow of people over time, like how many people are going to be there at any given moment, and how can you use that quantity of people? Or do you have to make a game that could work with very few people and with a lot of people? Maybe. For the exhibition, the areas that were behind the ticket, the areas that you had to pay to get into, there was a timed entry because they wanted to make sure everyone could have enough time and not be crowded, so they didn't want a big rush right as soon as the exhibition space opened. They wanted to make it flow more smoothly, so every half hour they would let in another 30 or 40 people, and that worked great. However, this piece was actually in a public area, so in addition to that regular flow, it also would have people that were coming just to go to the cafe, or that were moving through that space to get to another thing. Sometimes there was a really big crowd because there was a big concert, and when it let out, that space needed to actually accommodate a few hundred more people simultaneously, some of whom would be playing the game. And they had to design it for that. The positioning of the physical object couldn't, say, block the fire exits or things like that. So they had to really find the perfect angle and location and size, and they changed the number of panels a number of times and things like that. And then what are the people's expectations about the use of the space? Because you can sort of work with that. If you know people are going to be going through the space sort of purposefully because they need to get to the restrooms or something, you need to adapt your game so that it isn't causing people, it isn't obstructing the natural use of the space, but you could also maybe make your game work with the way that people are physically moving through. Are they walking slowly and carrying a drink, or what are they doing? And then especially important for this piece, because it was in such a public area, it was safety. The sheets of metal are quite thin and they're mostly smooth, but Eric and Natalie actually spent a lot of time like just filing down the edges of all the little holes, and the tech team too, of course, to make sure that there wasn't any edge where a small child could hurt themselves. And in fact, the size of the pegs and the size of the holes are a regulation. You can't have a size that's like a certain, it has to be really small, or it has to be much bigger so that a child couldn't get their finger stuck in it, or an adult couldn't either, I hope. That would be me probably if it had been. And then the pieces themselves are the colors that they are because they needed to find a non-toxic paint, because what if a kid comes up, puts one in their mouth, you know? So they had to make a lot of design decisions based on the fact that this is in a very public space and people can touch it and taste it. And so that affected a lot the process of their design and development. Stats about who are the visitors from the staff, if there is such a thing. But I think what's even more important about knowing who your visitors are and thinking about is because if it's a physical game, you need to accommodate a lot of different types of people. For instance, the Gaite has a program to invite seniors to come and learn how to use technology, learn how to use the internet and the web, and actually even learn how to play games. And this is a shot from the Espace Jeux Video. So there's a dedicated video game arcade, really, in the Gaite, and they have the group Game Older. So, and that's the Game Older attendees, but then also you can see there's quite a few younger people, and there's constantly young people at the Gaite who come there either with a school trip or after school, and a lot of teenagers too. So you have to think about the game, the players, as the variations they have in physical size. Like literally, do you have to have parts of the game that are close to the ground for young people, and their age and their level of ability, or are there people that will be coming with a cane or in a wheelchair? The variations in comfort that people would have with computers, with games, with technology, all need to be considered. And even, of course, in a multinational kind of place, you think also about language. How many languages does the project need to be in? And can people even read and write? They might be too young for that. And then you also need to think about the social roles that people have. What is their purpose for being there, and their purpose for engaging with the work that you've created? Often it will be parents and children, but they will have very different goals about what they're needing from the game, and you might even design it to have different kinds of levels or types of participation to accommodate the fact that so many parents and children will be playing together. Or maybe you have young adults that are there and they're there for more of social reasons. So you could have a game that's going to accommodate people who are there to learn or to teach or to flirt. One example is this project from Baby Castles. You may know them. They're experimental game collective and do a lot of arcades, crazy arcades in New York. And they created a place called Meowton, which is a arcade entirely composed of games for cats, about cats and for cats, and then built the entire structures of the arcade cabinets, if you want to even call them that, as cat accessible buildings. So what I was comparing this to is that this accommodates people who are tall, like these adults. On the right-hand side, there's a game they're playing that's inside kind of a high-up box, like you know how cats like to go up to high-up places. And if kids wanted to play it, they had to sort of stand up on the ladder there. And then the building on the left is actually the Meowton Town Hall. And perspective here makes it a little difficult to tell, but the entrance is quite small and low. So if you wanted to play that game, you had to crawl into it and play the game by touching these pads or mats that were on the floor, and then by batting a cat toy that was like hanging overhead from the ceiling. So that was a very playful game that I think probably a lot more kids were playing that than adults, but Meowton had something for everyone. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. So another thing that I observed a lot, and that part of having a show like this was to emphasize, is that that games that are physical can offer you so much more than things that are only screen-based, and that we learn kinesthetically, we learn from movement. And this is even for games. I'm really excited actually to see the games downstairs and the games that are movement-based. But of course, not all games that incorporate movement need to be about movement. It's not necessarily a medical or an exercise game. This one, for instance, the game is actually, electricity comes from other planets. It's much like a musical instrument, and by moving along on the strips that you see on the floor, you would cause different tracks of the music to trigger, and also the wall display to change significantly. And if you teamed up with your co-players, you could change and make even more fantastic graphics happen if you could figure out what the secret pattern was, which was to stand like in a straight line. And using all the senses, I think, makes a game much more memorable. And I think actually there was no game in the exhibit like this, but what I'd really like to work with more in the future is games that use scent, because scent is such a strong trigger for memory, and how can we take advantage of that? But a lot of the pieces in Joue Le Jeu used the sense of physical, kinesthetic, physical movement, and sound, and of course vision. What I would still like to see is more smell and taste games, but I'm going to have to wait for another show, or I'm just going to have to do it myself, basically. The challenge of making games that are more physical and they're using all these other senses, though, they get a little bit scary, because especially with taste and smell, if they're not in the symbolic realm of signs, then things like the taste and smell could really have physical effects on players. So if you're allergic to something and you smell it or you taste it in a game, you don't really realize it. That could be quite dangerous for players. And of course, with all the physical kinetic games, you run the risk of injury. This game, propinquity, requires you to get as close as possible to the other player and try to get your hand, which has a sensor glove on it, near a sensor that's placed somewhere on the body of the other player. But it could get a little bit like, not judo, but it was very smooth, but it could get very physical and a little bit wrestling, like when you're trying to reach around someone to get to the other spot. Or I'm sure a lot of people here have played Johann Sebastian Joust, and if you don't know it, it's
down there.
Yeah, okay. So if you haven't played it, go play it and you'll see. But essentially that physical games lead to the risk of injury. But if our goal is to deeply affect people and change their emotions, change their feelings, change their perceptions, I think we should still try these things more often. So one of the challenges of making something physical is that you still need to play test it, and playtesting things in the material world is a bit more complicated than doing things that are in the sheerly imaginary virtual space. So I think what I want to show you really quickly is a video of one of the pieces called Kit Operette, and then just talk about it after. Oh, is the audio up? It would be really nice to have the music.
Just go back.
I might pause it. Props that you saw were stage props that were causing the music from the opera to be triggered. So if no one had been playing with any of those toys, there would be no vocals. So they were causing by being attached to sensors, the vocals to trigger. So this whole piece, it took a lot of abuse from players because they were interacting with it in very obvious, the way that you would expect to interact with it. For instance, that table tennis game, when I played it, it's attached with a cable to the table, but if you missed the ball and you went running for it, you still had the tennis, paddle in your hand, and you would stretch the cable to you'd forget that you were attached to it, and so it really got disconnected quite a lot. And then this set of wings, we didn't see it in the video, but a really lovely set of costume wings that are also hooked to sensors. And kids loved putting these on, but what they love to do is not just stay in the little area that's lit up and is the right place to stand for them, but of course like run across the room flapping their arms. And the umbrella was often, it was meant to be twisted, but it often was yanked instead of twisted. So I think, and this isn't to say that none of these things should have been made. It is only to say that I think one of the challenges is that you have to test them with a sort of real-world situation, and often that means letting people play them for a while, and like letting the general public play it. And it's kind of a challenge in these cultural spaces. They have kind of tight schedules of when they want to open to the public. How do you allow it to be play tested in a real situation before you've opened, or do you just let it open and know that things are going to go wrong? And I think that we really need to have some kind of understanding that the game, and even not just the technical and physical parts of it, but also the design of the game. If you design this game for a social space, you may want to set aside budget and schedule for things to happen after the show has opened and be able to improve and change the work as the show is still open. So that's kind of, people don't really think along those lines, but I would argue that would make for a much stronger piece of work. So I think one of the last things I want to show you is it's the idea of the power of the special. And what I mean by that is that these things that happen in physical space can do things that you can't quite do in a purely digital medium, like change the mood and the lighting and what's the person's traveling through the space. And we do try to replicate these things, these mood setting things and these experiences really in the digital world, but I found that doing things in the real physical world just is so much more profound, and that in fact it may not be possible to do that for every single person in the physical world the way you can with everyone that plays the same game could theoretically go to the same room or something. But making something in the physical world special and something that only a few people experience could also be an interesting design decision, even though it's a little counterintuitive. We like to think that we're making the game so that everyone could have the same experience, but I think making something that's truly special could also be strong. And what we're looking at here, well, now, here, is something called the building's heart. It was in the piece that Hide and Seek did called The Building Is. And I didn't show you much of the entire piece, but what's important about this part is that this is actually a secret hidden room that most people that went to go see our show never saw, because you have to go through 5 different mini games to reach, to in the end sort of get the certificate that says you've finished. And then if you've finished, the building, which has senses and feelings and it sees you and perceives you, and you've played these games and now it knows you, the building might call that it wants you to come help it. And if you hear that announcement and you're the first person to arrive at the place that you need to be, then you'll be given a special key that allows you to go through a locked door at the back of the room, back of the gallery, it's almost like you're going, literally it actually is, you're going backstage at the Gaite. They let us use one of the rooms that is normally a storage room behind a locked door. So, and then the lights start to dim and this strange music and strange sound effect is coming out of it. And when you finally get to the threshold and you go in this room, this is what you see. It's like this incredibly creepy organ thing, and you're only allowed to go there one at a time. Like when it calls for someone, if you come with your friends, they're only going to let the one who was selected, go in. So you can't huddle with your buddies. You really have to just be very brave. And if you get in there and you're quite brave and you get close to the heart, you can tell that there's some holes in the side of it. And if you are really brave and you reach in, you can feel that there's stuff inside the heart and these wires, and they're the heartstrings of the building. And if you pluck them, they're kind of like, you know, the strings of a stand-up bass, and they're going bong. They are also sensors, and what they do is they change the mood of the building. So when the lights start to change, the colors change, the building maybe goes from being upset to being joyful, and it's something that you alone were able to do because you were selected and you got through the threshold. So that's sort of what I'm trying to describe as like being singled out. It's not really fair. Hardly anyone saw this, and a lot of effort and time and of course budget was put into making it. But it was one of the most interesting things, I think, for the few that did see it and that would talk about it afterwards, of course. And it was, yeah, the problem then is that, again, you can't go with someone else. So what if you're a parent and you have a child? Or what if the child gets it, but the child's a little too young? Or there's a lot of different things that you have to think about, or you just have to accept that some people are not going to be able to experience it. Well, I didn't talk too much about the arcades, but I want to at least mention in short one of the games that we showed in one of our arcades. We had these arcades because we wanted to emphasize that yes, you can try this at home. There are games out there that are doing something interesting with gameplay, are doing something experimental or something moving or just very different. And we focused one of the arcades on what we called Jeu d'auteur, so like film d'auteur, a game that is made from a very singular voice, not necessarily just by one person, but still coming from a very individual and strong perspective. And the game I want to talk about is called Papo Iyo. You may already know about it. It was recently released. And it's a deeply personal game that what you see here is a boy. You play as this boy, Kiko, and he has a couple of friends. One is a small robot, but the other one is this giant pink monster. And the monster is very helpful and allows you to do different things and get different places in the game. But the problem with the monster is that he is addicted to poisonous frogs. And if he sees one, he'll go for it. And if he eats it, he becomes a raging demon-like monster, and he chases you, and he's very destructive to you and to other people in the game. And the backstory of this game is that it was created by a fellow called Heather Kelley with his team in Montreal called Minority. And it's based on, he's South American, and he based this story on his own life story growing up with an alcoholic father. So in the game, your character has to negotiate the very troubling emotional relationship with this helpful but also very destructive creature. So I think we need a lot more games like this that are very personal perspectives, including games for change. Of course, anything that's created with personal expression, something that's created as art, it can also say something. It can say something powerful. It can stand for something. It can have a belief or a message. Art has always been a powerful way of changing hearts and minds and changing behaviors. And art games, I think, are clearly no exception to that. So as both a player and a creator, that is exactly what I am looking for. Thank you.